So welcome everybody. Lovely to see you as always. My name is Naomi Stead. I'm a professor of architecture at Monash University. And this second series of Light at the End of the Tunnel is a collaboration between Parla and the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne, and we thank them very much. As always, we begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country across Australia's many nations and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to elders past and present and to the Indigenous Australians who are part of the Parla community. As many of you will know, Light at the End of the Tunnel is a series that we were running throughout last year in the first season of the pandemic. We did 30 of them last year, and Justine and I decided to reprise as a second series because it felt like there was still a need for support and camaraderie and conversation related to issues about how architecture as a profession, a discipline and a practice will be affected and has been affected by the pandemic, and particularly how we, the people of architecture, are being affected. So this week, our guests are Ilana Razbash and Sue Wittenoom, and they will reflect on the second part of lessons from the lockdown following the first part we had last week. The format is Q&A, informal but informative. So Justine and I ask questions and try to keep things flowing, but we also take questions from the floor throughout. Also, please feel free to add your own observations and experiences into the chat, and we really do like this parallel narrative that does tend to emerge with people making their own observations. Justine, would you like to introduce Sue and Ilana?
I would love to introduce Sue and Ilana. Sue and Ilana have been, I just would describe them as stalwarts of the Parla Light at the End of the Tunnel sessions last year, but really of all of our online and in-person events. And Sue just said perhaps a better term was Parla Tragics, which we think is a really excellent term, and we should all be Parla Tragics. Last time on this topic we had Tiwa and Sarah, who spoke quite a lot from the perspective of those managing practices, which was a really valuable and important conversation, and it's going to be up online soon. But today we have two fabulous speakers who can probably speak more from the perspective of the individual, maybe, I'm not sure, we'll see where we go. And also bringing a cross-generational view to the topic. So Sue is a registered architect with an MBA, 3 decades of experience with Lend-Lease, DEW and ACOM's strategy and practice. And through all of that work as an architect, as a project manager and an advisor, she's interested in design for change. She's now runs her own consultancy called The Soft Build, which is a specialist consultancy to help organisations use buildings as platforms for renewal and reinvention. As I said, she's a fabulous contributor to Parla, and we really value her, so thank you, Sue. Ilana is also a fabulous contributor who we also value very much, a registered architect in the earlier stages of her career, but very active member of the architectural community. She is passionate about buildings for people and communities, and is interested in a range of public education and health projects. She's got a real interest in innovative procurement, and she co-hosted one of the sessions on procurement with us last year. She's interested in the future of practice and plurality within architecture and radical listening. And as I often say, I know these things because I read their Marion's List profile. So please make sure you have a Marion's List profile so I can know about you too, as can everybody else. But for now, I will stop sharing my screen and see you all. It's really lovely to see everybody here, and head into the conversation. And we thought we'd just start off, Sue and Ilana, by asking how you're going. How is it? Lockdown 6 for you, Ilana. Lockdown 2 or 3 for you, Sue. How are you going?
Good, actually. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Justine, Naomi. Great to be back. I think it's just wild to think that we still need it, but it's such an incredible community. So I think it's such a Friday highlight, right? Going well. I'm between jobs at the moment, so I'm just resting and excited to start the new one, but that'll probably be online, I think, as a beginning, so as a new stage. So that's something on my horizon.
So that's something to talk about too, how one does that. So Sue, how are you?
Yeah, I'm well, and thank you for that warm intro, Justine. And yes, thank you, Parla. Really, I'll echo Ilana. What Parla brings to the is so special, and it's one of the things that I wanted to touch on today: the value of that community and how it's pivoted from being something that we can do together to something quite extraordinary here online. So thrilled to come back and have another chat. So, I was thinking about, how would Ilana and I sort of pick up the baton from the practice managers last week, and thought that you must be going for the freelance people in picking us and looking at our experience. And I've been a freelance solo practitioner for 6 years now. When I spun out of ACOM and I started the soft build, and I was working a couple of days a week at the hub in Hyde Park, and sometimes back in ACOM's offices 18 months ago when this all started. And it was a big change. My pipeline dried up. I had some work in hand that kept going, but I basically pulled up any kind of discretionary spend and just retreated at home for 18 months. So it's been a really weird, wild time. And in that time, I've had no work for 6 months. I was qualified for JobKeeper and had, very grateful for this universal basic income, which wasn't universal enough, but was terrific to be in a position to be able to access it. So from being busy freelancer, I was busy experimenter when the work dried up. And now, 18 months later, the work picked up again. So things went back to semi-normal and work came back, but work was being done in very different ways. So being a freelancer who worked only online and doing a completely remote project was a steep learning curve as well. And now lockdown, this is lockdown 2 for us, serious lockdown. So it's, it feels like a lifetime in 18 months, and swings and roundabouts and lots of very good things about it too.
So how, you have been used to working, with dispersed teams for a very long time. That's the nature of doing freelance work, isn't it? You're never working by yourself, but you're working with different people in different contexts. That's a very different thing than shifting everything, working entirely online. But how do you, I guess I'm interested, we talked before last year with you about how you operate in these kind of dispersed teams and how you manage in dispersed environments. And I just wonder if you've got some insight into how that's working this lockdown, I guess.
Well, it kind of, my professional interest is in how we can make flexible working and hybrid workplace more of a permanent thing, because there's so many good reasons for wanting to capture the benefits of that. But for me personally, it wasn't a lot of actual online, always remote working. So it wasn't until this year that I had a purely remote, all desktop project that was every client contact remote, every team collaboration remote, and every bit of working either via chat or by work. And it was a big shift, but it was also joyful. And the informal connections that happened in the working were just as joyful as sitting around with people in the office. And I think that's borne out in a couple of different things, that something that I thought was going to be crappy and hard was actually quite delightful. And that it's being scared of it is often the problem. We should just dive in and try these things, because we are surprised.
So
it's all about intention, isn't it, Sue? It's all about intention, and when you commit to doing it properly and caring and making those meaningful connections, you can do them just as well online. No, in many ways even better. as a parlour community as an example of what's been achieved just through this stream of programming alone. But I had a whole project last year in 2020 from SD through to the very end of CD, never met the client in person.
Wow.
Stakeholders, all stakeholder consultation online, everything. But you're meeting 3-4 times a week, and you build that rapport and you build those connections. And it's about the intent. Everyone wanted to get it done, and the stakeholders in the user group were a very vulnerable community. And it was a very high-profile project, and you knuckle down, you get it done. And as architects and everyone involved in the industry, we are upstream of a lot of those problems and opportunities, but that's a real privilege. So I think we just got to get ahead of it and not wallow so much.
One of the things that's struck me, it's kind of obvious to state it, but there are students who are will be finishing their master's degrees at the end of this semester who have never been on campus and have never met their classmates. So, I mean, I guess this is one of the things. I remember when you were on last time, Sue, I guess at that moment we're all in something of a kind of excited crisis mode, and we're all looking for, you know, how opportunities would emerge. And I remember last time you were talking a lot about the opportunities in distributed working, but I guess by now we're also a little bit possibly ground down. It's certainly not novel anymore, and the adrenaline rush has somewhat died away. And how do we deal with this when it actually is the new normal, when people have studied, in spite of the fact of being in the same city as their university, have never met their classmates? You know, what do we do when that is the new normal?
Well, I'm hoping that it's never, I mean, this wasn't a normal, this was a pandemic health reaction. So only having to do it remote while it's possible, I don't think is a great thing to do. And while all remote education for something when you're doing a top-up or when you're learning a course, I think, you know, is fine and makes it more accessible for many people. But those critical bits of, you know, when education is formation as well, and when the community is critical and the context and the connections and the friendships, you know, so for your first degree and for all those, you know, those basic building steps, I think it's really sad not to be able to connect. And the model has to be more of very you know, a mix of events, intense events where you get together for big intense doses of people over time, and then you go back and you do the work remotely, because just all of it all the time. Yeah, I'm sitting in on the master's crits last week for the UNSW Social Agency Studios, and half of the students were in China and hadn't even seen the site for their capstone project. And, you know, but still had done a tremendous job, and the quality of the camaraderie was still evident, but it's just not the same as being able to be together.
I'm absolutely in awe of those students and graduates, though. I can't imagine how hard that would have been. And honestly, I hope employers, when they're looking at those CVs and they have anyone who studied or let alone completed a master's in 2020 and 2021, have that in front of them. I'm just thinking these are incredible, resilient, competent people, because to rise to that challenge and get it done and come out so well out the other end, you can trust these students and grads to be in front of your clients and working on your projects. They're more comfortable than you are in the digital world. So it's like, I just have so much empathy for them, but it's huge challenges, really.
And you've, I mean, you're about to start a new job, which will be online. We've been in and out of lockdowns over the last year, but you've moved jobs. How has that been? You know, I suppose the process of shifting into.
I think online helps with that.
Online
to
helps.
Be honest,
that's
never waste a good crisis. Works both ways. And if you're not in a place that aligns with your values, or it's not what you need, then you don't let the lockdown scare you into thinking that you're stuck, because the job market is so hot at the moment. The recruiters are messaging people for referrals and offering referral bonuses. I've never heard of this ever in any industry, that if you can recommend someone, there's $1,000 cash in it for you. So there's a lot of work out there, and often you'll have your pick. The most recent effort turned around very, very quickly. So take your chances while you can in lockdown. So there's an upside to it. If you can work on having those boundaries, yeah.
And that's a very different view than I guess we were, worrying about a year ago, where no one had any sense of people were very, very concerned about the pipeline. So that feels to me like a really substantial shift over that year, which brings with it its own challenges, but it's a much happier place to be. So what's your, I feel like Sydney's kind of quite different, because whereas I'm just about Sydney and Melbourne here, which is not very nice, but where we came in and out of lockdowns feels like relatively constantly. You had a long period where felt like things were sort of, I remember going to Sydney and being horrified that no one was wearing masks on the train, for example.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. The first half of the year, things were starting to get back to a much better normal. Concerts were back on, but plays were back on. So performance that had been sort of ripped out was starting to come back. But, I actually managed to sneak in. I got back to WA for a couple of weeks. And then before the Sydney lockdown happened, was in South Australia for a long weekend. So we were bloody lucky. And now it's so different across the different parts of Sydney. If you're in the people in the hotspots and the LGAs where it's worst, are having a very different time of it than the rest of us in quieter parts of Sydney and people who are lucky enough to be vaccinated. So it's a very strange mixed patchwork, and there's no universal experience in Sydney, and I think we felt so. We were watching Melbourne last year and I think probably the light at the end of the tunnel was born out of the Melbourne experience and about that long time of the Melbourne experience. But when I looked at Juliet O'Brien's site this morning and looked at the COVID data, I think the Sydney experience is looking worse. The we're not bending the curve. Some suburbs are worse than ever. The numbers, the contact tracers can't keep on top of it, but yet with vaccines coming up, we'll get back to normal somehow. So the only upside is it ended before, it'll end again. We'll get there eventually. I think the thing is there are just going to be multiple tunnels. There'll be lots of tunnels.
Yes, well, when we wanted to set this up again, it was because, Naomi and I had a phone call, we're like, it looks like Sydney's going to be in this for the long haul, and there's a whole lot of lessons that we've learned that can be shared. And now, of course, we find ourselves back in another long haul lockdown ourselves. So, Ilana, sorry I interrupted you.
No, good. I was just going to echo Sue's sentiment that it's not forever, and pandemics have come and gone before in the past, even without vaccines. So hopefully us in science and modern medicine will get ahead of it. But we have these opportunities that we can also be using, networking, like everyone's come along today, or I registered in 2020, finished off my logbook and registered at the start of this year. So all those courses, I don't know about PALS, but I did PARC. That's all moved online, really fantastic, really well refined. So you can use that extra time that's available to you as well to further any study or accreditation that you need.
Ilana, can I ask you? Sorry, Justine. I just wanted to kind of get into a little bit more detail about the process of starting an entirely new job, entirely online, and also you mentioned that you're resting at the moment, which is absolutely
radical and punk in our industry.
Yeah, exactly, which I totally applaud. One of the things that came up in our conversation last week was that there's a bit of a squeeze at the moment where there's so much work on, but there is no pipeline of international labour. So, which is making some people very, very busy. And I'm guessing that if you're going into a new job, you might be fairly busy. So have you had thoughts about how you're going to get to know your new colleagues and do that onboarding process?
I don't know. I don't know. And that's something I'll find out about. But I'm trusting that everyone's intention is in the right place and those things will just happen. And I think every organisation is pretty different. And if you're making the effort to keep your staff and your people connected and getting to know each other and having that system. Just have to have faith in it at the moment, because I'm really not sure. I've never started a job online. I've changed jobs throughout the pandemic, but never started one cold turkey online, and I don't think we're going to be getting out of what's happening in Melbourne before then.
Sue, what do you have any thoughts about this?
Any tips, Sue?
No, I just think it would be, you should keep track of it, Ilana. You should almost like journal it or blog it, because that experience, and I'm not sure where you're going, and I'm not sure how much they've thought about it, but that, onboarding is one of these things that used to happen by osmosis, and that you would just rock up online and you would just absorb the cues. And it was Tiwa and Sarah were talking 2 weeks ago about how student interns, that was a fantastic example I hadn't of where just being there is enough to be able to serve the purpose of finding out more about what it is to be an architect, just to throw a school student in and let them soak up the vibe without and see, just to watch and be wide-eyed for a while. So there are things that only work by being there, but just relying on cue, or just relying on osmosis, and not being intentional, and not planning for how to explain what it means, what this practice means, or what it means to be successful here, or what kinds of interactions are valued, or all of those things that we read, and architects, we're even better at reading those things in the environment. When we can't put ourselves in a situation and make sense of our surroundings like that, then someone has to do it for us. Someone has to be explicit. And the companies that are doing it best are the ones that want to have a global workforce and want to be able to bring people together from wherever, and have a pure knowledge place. So Atlassian, because they want, they're poster children for actually systems online that help teams collaborate and work. But they have this cultural layer with people like Don Price, which talk about the practices, and which codify the learnings and share them in things like their team playbook, which has a range of different, really smart things that they've learned, or they've built, or they've shared, or they've tried about how they can work better at teams. And they're constantly updating things like the team playbook about the health of a project, or the quality of your relationships with each other, or keeping track of work, or keeping track of progress. That of course is their core business, and it makes sense for them to share and update it. But it's incredibly valuable about how you do it when it's a blend of having no other option but doing it this way, and not being able to get together.
Hey, Ilana, I was interested because, as you know, part of our choice of you two as speakers was to see how things are playing out at different, let's say, stages of career. Obviously, Ilana, you won't want to make generalizations about everybody else who's at your stage of career, but your friends and peers and colleagues who are at a similar stage, how do you think they're traveling?
I think there's a mixture of worry and concern. I think people have been very worried about job security and what the industry has in store for them at the moment, what projects are coming up. And that's kind of really concerning, because there is a lot of work. Everyone is very, very busy. Some architecture firms, I'm hearing their books are closed until next year, which is wild. So I think for some people, registration digitally has been really great and really exciting for them, and they've managed to progress on their careers that way. But I think it's a very mixed bag. And probably because these lockdowns, compared with the sort of generalized anxiety, make people feel nervous for their positions in firms across the industry. So you do have to advocate for yourself and remember that it is a good time, actually. It's a seller's market, I guess. If we're as the workers of the product, it's a seller's market.
Well, yeah, and if you can spin your head around to be optimistic, I have no doubt there are actually opportunities now that perhaps weren't there previously, because it's so hot the market is so hot for staff. What about you, Sue? What are your peers at your stage of career?
Well, my peer group is now the people or the late career practitioners who've had a gut full of big practices and big organisations, and who've just gone to hell with it. I want to do something that I'm interested in, and I want to be able to determine, what sort of things I track and what sort of things are important and where I spend my time and what sort of learning I do. And I don't want to have to fit into somebody else's budget for that. So I think it just got to a point of, after 30 years or so, just going, listen, I've just got to do my own thing for a bit. And it's just been joyful to be able to just pursue the things that I care more about, and to be able to follow that thread in projects and with clients. So, and it's never been easier to set something up on your own, and to be productive and to connect on your own. The resources around to support it and are fantastic. So I'm still learning and still working out how I get more structure about this. It's a running gag with friends and family that I've been working on a website for a year now, just because there's time to spend on a year on something like that. But sort of retooling for being an individual, thinking about the other thing about where am I at my career. It's also about where is the profession with the planet, and what is it that I can do when I'm creating this new kind of consultancy and when I'm playing in this strange change space that will make most impact on the kind of world that we're living in now. And so thinking about how can I craft an offering that is going to help in some way to the kind of transformation that we've got to go through. Because if the upheaval that we've had for the last year and a bit, which has made a dent in the planet in carbon emissions and in a whole lot of practices, we've got to do this every year for the next 10 years. We've got to make these sorts of radical changes that are unsettling and that are destabilizing and that are going to throw us all off our normal trajectory. And we've got to reform our communities and our habits and our families and our practices in a way that means we'll never get it. This is just the first of many tunnels. Again, we've got to be resilient to be able to cope with shit like this for forever from here on in.
And do you feel like you're kind of accumulating more agency to have impact in that regard than, if you're in a large organization?
I don't have to second guess anybody or to... Yeah, there's definitely the freedom to speak or to act as an individual than when I was, at a Fortune 500 company or a listed company. But there's, even for people who are operating in those environments, I think there's a personal contribution that people can make that we can't rule out. But for me, Justine, it's been liberating. It's really been great.
No, I mean, I asked partly because I guess I know quite a lot of people who are contemplating a move, and it's frightening. It's really frightening when you've had it. I remember when I left my last job, it's quite frightening. So I'm interested to, if we maintain this generational conversation for a minute, I'm interested to know what you would say to others who are, a bit itchy, wondering what to do next, and contemplating heading out on their own as a very experienced professional. I'm just curious what you might say to them.
Well, I'd say do it, because you don't, you'll only regret the things you don't do, not the things you do and you learn from. So just get people to go for it. I think there's so many people who are who get stuck. People get stuck in organisations, and an organisation doesn't have your interests. As good as Sarah and Tiwa were 2 weeks ago, having practices with HR managers and practice managers who look after you and who are, you have to make the call for yourself. You can't rely on a firm to do the best thing for you all the time, and you certainly can't rely on a big organisation to do the best thing. So, if there's that urge, then I think time like this, where you've got some time and space to listen to that, people should jump after it.
Kim, do you want to tell us about your experience?
I wasn't trying to throw my hand up there, but I really resonate with what Sue's saying. Like, I've been Naomi would know me. I studied at UTS under Naomi's guidance. So I've been in architecture probably for just over 15 years. I was in an associate role in my last role, and I was there in a corporate organisation for 7 years. And I feel exactly like Sue. I think I just had a gutful after going through the last lockdown and the experiences that we had there. I know every practice is different, but I didn't really feel supported or cared for being here. And my husband works in trade, so he's not home, and I was homeschooling 2 kids and trying to work as well, as many people in the population work. So in March this year, I just made the decision to leave, because realistically, when you ask yourself if you're happy, and you can't answer that question, so that really was the key for me, was when I asked myself if I was happy, and I wasn't. So things are very different now, and again, it's all about searching for work and looking for work, and getting that work to transition into paid work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I should say Kim is our Instagram guest host this week, so all along. So I guess I'd like to turn that around and ask Ilana, what would you? I mean, I think, you know, Tiwa and Sarah last fortnight were really articulate about what a practice can do. What would you? Again, it's we're asking you to speak on behalf of your cohort, which may be unfair, but what would you say to the people who are employing your generation, and what you and how they can kind of, I suppose, partly care for you, but also, you know, build practices that support developing practitioners at the moment. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations about this, but often from the people who are the leaders and their ideas. I'm really interested to hear.
I mean, a lot of the sort of complaint about what happens in lockdown is, oh, it's so hard to mentor young people. They're not learning by osmosis because they can't eavesdrop on us. But through the last 1.5 years, 2 years, I've had the most incredible mentors who have put so much effort into having me along for all our meetings, having me involved in projects, that, you know, allows me to build confidence in my career, allowed me to finish off my registration. And it was just about intent. Granted, we already had long working professional relationships in the real world before shifting online, but it was about intention. And I think I could, through a range of those mentors and places, people that I have worked with and collaborated with, I've felt a difference in leadership and management styles where if you're not having that Friday evening team check-in or Monday morning team check-in, you feel it, and you feel that isolation. So it's not even like a constant daily Zoom call that you need with your bosses. But even at the start of the week where you see all the little heads of the same office, like we're looking at each other now, and then at the end of the week, even that really, really helps. But it's just effort. So if you want to have a thriving practice where everyone's involved and you're genuinely invested in supporting your young emerging architects, then you'll make that effort. But if you're just taking on grads and students as fodder and labour, then they will be forgotten, and that's what's going to happen. So I think in these moments of crisis, it really sort of reveals where people's hearts are in organisations in general, and what that intent is. So and you've got to be intentional about it, though. It can't be an accident.
That was one of the things that struck me about our last conversation. Was it Tiwa? I can't remember, or Sarah, who said that it had become very clear during the pandemic that leaders who are already good communicators really, really played to their strengths. They really rose to the top, and they tended to over-communicate possibly in order to really, as you say, intentionally and actively reach out to their staff and kind of keep them in the fold, as it were. Do you feel like that's been, I mean, in the cases where that has happened, do you feel like that's been Has that worked? I mean, has that been well received?
Totally. Because then it feels like you're sitting side by side. And when you don't view the young person in your office as a stressor, but instead see them as a collaborator, and they can get on the phone and they can shoot you a text, and you just have that safety, really. It's just generally psychological safety, I'd say, in any organisation, where you feel safe to ask a question, and that carries into the digital world. And so you're working very quickly. You're not even wasting each other's time with what people might worry would be a dumb question, because it's so fast. It becomes so efficient. So I think it's really helped. Yeah.
Your comment, you've said intention a couple of times, Ilana. One of the highlights of the year has been able to leap into talks and webinars from all over the place. One of the standouts for me was Ellen Langer, who's a Harvard professor and a researcher on mindfulness, which we were talking before about On Being, the On Being podcast. There's an Ellen Langer, Krista Tippett On Being interview, which is a good way into her work. But her work on mindfulness, which sounds sort of a bit hippy-dippy, it's not the mindfulness sort of meditation, but it's mindfulness is the opposite to mindlessness. And that when something is on rote, or when you're phoning something in, or when you're not caring or not really engaging, you are not alive to what is happening in front of you, and alive to a situation. And that when people often say that you should be present, it's actually not as helpful as saying you should notice, and you should engage. And I think the intentional mentoring and pairing of someone who's an existing, a leader in a practice and a new person in a practice, focusing on the qualities of how do you come into a stronger relationship in a firm, that's an example of mindfulness that's been made, the need for it's been made explicit in these times.
And you can't lead people you don't care about. That's what Brene Brown's research comes out with. You actually have to be invested in the people you work with. Yep. And that goes for project architects who are managing documentation teams all the way through to the top. That's everyone.
Yeah. And that also, means that people are vulnerable to, have they got a good person as a team leader or not, or have they got one of the people who are less sympathetic, less caring, or more stressed or more burdened, and without the time to be able to invest in that relationship. So there's that patchy delivery for people and teams across firms.
In fact, Badru, speaking of stalwarts, Badru has a good observation along those lines. Do you want to put that, Badru?
Everyone, hi Ilana, nice to see
you. Hi Badru.
By the way, for getting registered.
Thank you.
Hi Sue, thank you for bringing up the point. Of course, sorry I joined late, I had a meeting, but anyway, the thing that I always felt that if the leaders don't show that they care, then the next generation doesn't learn that they should care. It's the same as parents, being an example for children. And so I think, so it's got a very long ripple effect that people don't quite sometimes realize. Because if they see the leaders are, like, oh, I don't care about the grads, then when they finally call their way up to that position, they might be like, oh, I had it hard, or they may be like, oh, this is the norm. So that's just my experience. That's what I always felt.
100%, Badru. Thank you so much for saying that. I think that even becomes apparent at uni, doesn't it? When you start, but you have to make the intention, and all leaders have to make this intention, that it stops with you. The abuse and the idea of I suffered, therefore you shall suffer too, stops with you. Like, you're leading teams, you're leading people, you're in a relationship, that's it. You're not treating people like shit, even if someone else treated you like shit. That's not happening.
Kind of like breaking the vicious cycle,
Oh, you got to. Otherwise, it's this perpetuating abusive trauma that just continues through our industry that we don't often talk about, but we all know is there, and we've all suffered from it, or we have at least witnessed colleagues to whom something like that has happened to. And you don't know what to do in recourse, what the recourse is, or, there's plenty of resources out there actually for you, and go talk to industry leaders and organizations that are part of that. But back to leadership and caring, what Sue and I, and Badru's fantastic point, it's like, make that decision and have that intention that you're not going to perpetuate that harm, because the profession can't sustain it. Like, if we're biting each other's heads off, what is going to happen?
Eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, but
An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind.
yes, I think that's it. No, that's not mine. It's a quote from.
Yeah.
I'm not wrong, Mahatma Gandhi, I think. Yeah, but I'm not sure. So Google that, please.
What do you think about this, Sue? About like setting norms of, or indeed perpetuating leadership styles which do value care and you're looking after people?
Yeah, no, thank you, Badru, for sharing that. And no, the challenge is how do people see it, and how do organisations reward the people that do it? Because cultures grow when people understand what makes people successful. So to see that and I think in the university case, when we can't, when you're, a final master's crit that takes place in the social agency studio at UNSW is the most wonderfully affirming, fantastic supportive exercise. It's not the tear shreds off people kind of archetypal crit. So there's an expectation around how both the permanent and the visiting tutors and the people engage with students in that studio, which is supporting of the student and is also aware of what they've been through. I think we have to have, we have to be able to call out the people who are doing it well in practice as well. And that's the challenge of how often does that happen in a group situation, or how often does it happen in a one-on-one, or when the person receives it in the one-on-one, how do they make it known to other people what that other person has done? So it's how do we learn? How do we make it visible, and how do we learn from it?
And I think the other thing we, I suppose, need to recall is those leading practices are in pretty stressful situations right now. We had that great session on leadership at the start of, like over a year ago now with Adam Haddow and Eloise Atkinson, talking then about the stresses of trying to look after everybody and round a practice and keep the pipeline of work going. So I think the caring goes both ways as well. I think there's an argument, sort of, I don't quite know what the question there is. But
when it's earnest, I think everyone sees that, Justine.
Yeah.
When it's sincere, the staff care about the practice. They care about the workflow and the relationships you have and the continuity. Like, it goes both ways when it's genuine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and also I remember in some of the earlier light at the end of the tunnel sessions, there was a lot of emphasis on suddenly there was more transparency, that staff, more junior staff, will suddenly had access to information that otherwise they perhaps would never have had, like as in the business is, this is the financial situation of the business. We've got to all pull together so that we all have a job. And that suddenly there was a degree of transparency and, let's say, solidarity, even between leadership and sort of rank and file staff that perhaps hadn't been there before. And that was actually an unexpected but fantastic result of pandemic crisis. But as Justine is saying, the leaders were exhausted back then. So how are they now? They're exhausted. They've got an exhausted workforce. Yeah. Sorry, that's not a question.
I know. This has turned into a bit of a sort of roundup session, I think.
No, tech detox. That's my trick.
I think there are a lot more resources around now. People know that it's a draining, awful situation. And again, another terrific podcast, Minding Your Mind, with Ian Hickey and James O'Loughlin. Very timely. It's being broadcast now, and it's what we're living through now in terms of the stresses of the latest lockdowns. Covering fantastic issues around anxiety, depression, around trust, around authority, around community. It's a very vibrant discussion, and there are lots of resources around how to look after yourself, how to manage the stress of being isolated and compartmentalized. Naomi, the awareness that even the survey has brought to mental health by the light that you're focusing on the industry and the particular nature of our industry, but and the nature of our industry in the context of a lockdown and as well. I think people are more aware. I think that there are lots of good ideas bouncing around.
Yeah, and I must say, this is a bit of a sneak preview of the findings from our practice survey in the Wellbeing of Architects project, which is that we're analysing it, furiously analysing the data now, but what's already evident is that it's a sophisticated conversation that the architecture profession is having. It's not naive, it's actually quite sophisticated and complex, and it's understanding these issues as systemic and structural and not the fault of the individual. I think we've well and truly moved past the it's your fault because you didn't do enough yoga school of thought, and into understanding structural systems which are leading to sometimes good but sometimes also poor well-being outcomes. So I think you're right. I think the conversation is advancing, but there's a higher level of general knowledge and understanding. There's a higher degree of willingness to speak up. There's more people who are willing to say, I have struggled or I am struggling. But at the same time, I must say, I was having a meeting the other day with someone who said, I love the lockdown. I am living my best life. It really is so different for everyone. And, here in Melbourne, all of the 7 lockdowns have been they've all had a quite different flavour. And they've been variously bad or even good for different people. So it's hard to generalise, isn't it? It's really very granular.
And I think we also tend to either hear about the practices that are doing really well and the practices that are just appalling. And I suspect, it's a very, very, very wide range. And I'd say there's also just a whole lot in the middle, kind of doing their best, trying to learn as they go. But it's a really, really uneven field, and it always has been. But I feel like this has really exacerbated that unevenness. So again, I guess, we tend to try and sort of shine a light on the people who are doing really good, try doing very interesting things as a way of examples for, others that might pick up. And then we all also have the whispers of the horror stories. But it is a very uneven field, and there are very, very different experiences as leaders, as employees, as employers, as consultants. And I guess I suppose the thing we've always said, that Paula's always said, is, shop around and try things out. Because what suits one person also doesn't always suit the other. This is turning into a general rah-rah, but...
I have a question for Sue. I wanted to come back, Sue, to your comment before, which I think is an absolutely crucially important one, about how, I think you said this is the first of many tunnels, or, the beginning of a tunnel, which is very, very long, as in different types of crises, particularly climate and biodiversity crisis. And in our last session, it was Michael Lawarne, who I see is here, who made the excellent point that at least we've shown we can change. We've shown that. And if we see that as a positive thing, then we must change. And so we've done it before, we can do it again. So would that be one of the things you would say, Sue, that it's not only that we have to do that in practical terms, but also that psychologically it really helps to be trying to take a long view right now?
Yeah, well, absolutely for me. The long view of knowing what we've got to work towards, but the short view of knowing that we've survived and thrived through one cycle already. One of the concerns I had was that, when we did just start going back to normal, or when COVID went back to normal, that all the gains from being able to work flexibly and work from home would just kind of snap back, and that it would be really awful if that happened. And when in the beginning of this year of 2021, ACOM, for example, and another firm that I was involved in, while things were opening up, people were not going back to the office. There was, while some aspects of life we just can't wait to get back to normal, the office was not a normal. It was not a good normal. And people valued that ability to actually stay close to home. They valued the ability to work in their community. And so despite the bleatings of the property industry that the city is not dead and everyone will get back to the CBD, that, I think it's irrevocable, that there's no unwinding this fact, and that as lease expiries and those sorts of milestones come up, people won't be, it won't be the office as normal or as usual. It will be a new kind of platform, and it has to be a different kind of platform. It has, we can't have waste. We can't have we can't have zombie offices where there are desks waiting for people to turn up when they feel like they want to connect with their, with the rest of people. We have to have a more sensible way of convening, and a way that lets us stay in our communities, because it's sustainable. One of the big SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, to focus on the local environment and to have facilities, work, play, living and learning all in a tight radius around you. The 20-minute or the 30-minute city. We've got to be able to make this shift of work, home and office, a permanent one. So I'm tremendously hopeful that this is for the long haul. And it's my mission is to make sure that every organisation knows that it can undo the sort of the default of everybody come to the office, and can recover from everybody being stuck away from the office to develop some new kind of hybrid that makes sense for them and sense for the planet.
Sorry, Justine.
There you go.
So I wanted to ask that, how do you teach these firms to trust, and to trust their staff, and to trust each other? Because I just hearing it from all friends, colleagues, everyone in the industry, I don't know anyone who hasn't been dragged back to the office kicking and screaming by their organisation. I think that happens to most people at the moment in our sector, unfortunately. As soon as government restrictions allow it, people are pulled back and offices are filled to whatever capacity they're permitted, and that choice and agency gets sort of taken away from people, and it's not very favourable. And so young people who are concerned for their positions in firms are like, well, I have to comply. And they rush back and they run back. And I think, well, if you can't trust your staff, you have a hiring problem. That's like fundamental. You should be able to trust people. But how do you take some of that panic off the leadership who are having a hard time and are suffering, of course? And it is very hard to run a business through, unending threat of recession. But how did they come to that place of mindful care and trust and stuff?
It's hard. And again, Tiwa and Sarah a couple of weeks ago, when, so here we had gold standard HR practice managers going, oh, bloody hell, this Tetris of, it's a nightmare to manage. And so the best of the firms were saying it's difficult, and I think it's, going to be too hard. It's a fundamental adjustment of the mechanism of how performance is managed. And that's why these organisations that have gone down the flexible work, the activity-based route before the recession, had not just rethought their office to be able to be more flexible, they'd actually readjusted the performance contract at a team level so that people understood how work was being done. And your point, Ilana, is exactly right. You trusted people to hire them. How is it? And now you have this lived experience because of a crisis that they will get things done from home. There's just no logic under any circumstances for not being able to continue that in a more sane format that lets people still come together and have the time away.
I'd agree with you, Sue. I think they're going to be left behind as well eventually. It's just get on board or you'll be blacklisted. Not that there's an official blacklist, but there are whispers. We all talk, we all know, everybody knows what's going on. So it's...
The concern I've heard a number of times now is that people have been quite impressed with and very pleased with the productivity levels of their staff working remotely, and what they're really concerned about is losing the kind of culture that they value, and how that is, and the desire for having people back in the office has been as much about that as it has been about trust and productivity. So what do you say to those who are concerned that their sort of long-term culture of the company is being eroded?
Well, for us as built environment professionals, there is an element of what the spaces that we're in and the places that we gather as being formative, but it's not you know, we rely too much on our buildings and not enough on our people. I think that's a Jane Jacobs quote, that, you know, that people actually have to work hard at this, and that what makes people successful and what helps people grow and what creates a job is not a function of sitting at the same desk day in, day out. It's a quality of the attention, again, here's that word again, that you bring to the problem that you're working on and the relationships that you have with people. There are just too many examples of great organisations with really strong cultures that are only remote or are remote virtual to say that you have to have the built environment to have a culture.
We have a raised hand. Sarah, did you want to make a comment?
Yes, I want to make a comment, and I appreciate that maybe a lot of the comments that are being made by people who live in cities and who therefore have quite disconnected, I guess, work and personal lives in terms of location, and probably quite onerous commutes to work. I think the situation for us, certainly regionally, running a small practice where our staff probably spend we spend about 7 minutes getting to work, and our staff spend one spends max half an hour getting to work, and the other one actually commutes quite a long way and spends over an hour getting here. But for us, you know, we want our staff to be in the office, and it's nothing to do with productivity or trust, because quite honestly, if you're going to work from home and not work 7.5 hours but 5.5, you know, I'm never going to know anyway. So, you know, you kind of have to just let that go, and understand that, you know, maybe if you do phone someone's mobile because you want to talk to them about something and they don't pick up the phone, it's not that they've kind of gone to Woolies on your time. They might just be on the toilet, you know. And again, you just have to accept that, you know, no one's going to be on this sort of 24/7 call. And we want our staff back in the office because we like their company. We really enjoy having everyone in the office. And I think that's the same, I would say, I think they would say the same thing, because working is so much more pleasurable and so much more collaborative when everyone's together, because we can just, you know, I can pop my head up my computer and we're all sort of on a clustered desk, and I can just say, I forgot to ask you what happened the other day, or I've just got this email from somebody or other, or whatever. And it's just much more lively and real way of working than me sitting here on my own and then being scattered around, and then me thinking, it's completely mad to phone someone up to say, I've just remembered something I forgot to talk to you about earlier. And it's something completely inconsequential, but it is absolutely something I would say if they were sitting next to me, because it's just a conversation, it's just incidental communication, it's what makes working fun rather than boring. And if you work with people you really enjoy their company, you actually do want to talk to them about inconsequential stuff and just things they might find interesting, or something you saw that you think they, you know, might resonate with, or whatever. So I think that I know, and I think it's whoever said earlier there's no single experience, I think is absolutely on the button, because for us it's you know, as employers, we have to accept that our staff are going to do whatever they have to do while they're at home, you know, whether their kids are there or whether their flatmates just being loud on the phone because they're also working from home, you know, whatever their circumstances are, there's going to have to be a bit of compromise in terms of you're actually not going to sit there for 7.5 hours absolutely focused and absolutely efficient the whole time. And, you know, we totally accept that. And so it's not, for us, it's not about that. It's actually about, we enjoy the work we do, we enjoy the people we work with, and we want to have them back because we want to get that fun factor back into work, which is incredibly difficult to do over Zoom meetings or, you know, emails or whatever.
That's a very important observation, Sarah. Thank you. We're actually over time. Justine, how do you want to do this? Should we take Sarah's comment as a comment and wrap up, or Ilana and Sue, do you have urgent things you'd like to respond with quickly?
Maybe we give Ilana and Sue one more word. Ilana and Sue, do you have anything else you'd like to say, either in response to Sarah's impassioned pleasure in her staff's company?
Yeah, Sarah's absolutely right. No one ever got joy out of an email. That email is probably a target. But can I just say, I had more fun in the last year on music trivia online than I ever thought was humanly possible. So you never know quite when something is going to just really work really well.
Yeah, I agree with that. So it actually used to run like a Friday night show and tell for Zoom drinks with the office to sort of make everyone turn up and have a conversation starter. So maybe it's all back to that intention. But in terms of last words, thank you, Paula. Thank you for this space and the proof that it is possible to have a digital culture. I think actually this is a prime example, of an organization that's operating online and continue to build community online.
Yeah, amen. One of the highest quality social communities around right now. So yeah, a real triumph. I agree. Yeah. You're here, Ilana.
Yeah, so thank you so much for today. Thank you for having me, and for everyone who's been piping and waving and commenting and being involved today.
Cool. And I've got to say, one of the joys for me of all of this is getting to spend a teeny bit more time with Sarah Aldridge and a whole lot of other people in regional locations. So that's been a total win for us, Sarah. And everybody. So look, thank you all. I hope you're not all too exhausted. I've got to say I'm feeling quite exhausted today. You may have noticed. We have got next Friday. So Paula now has events every Friday lunchtime. We're back to that, but they're not all light at the end of the tunnel sessions. And next week we're kicking off with the first of the Deadly German Yarns, which are convened by a collaboration between Paula and Deadly German, which is a group of wonderful Indigenous women in the built environment. And it's convened by Sarah Lynn Rees, who is part of both organisations, and Danielle Hromick. It's going to be fantastic. They're kicking it off next Friday. Bookings are going through the roof. So if you want to be there, I would recommend you book for that now, because we do have an upper limit on our Zoom account. It's quite high, but it's looking like it's going through the roof. They're going to be fantastic. Next week, we're also kicking off the Parlour Reading Room, which you will have had emails about. You may have seen on our Instagram Anne's fabulous introduction to that. So that's kicking off next month. And it will end with an event at the end of the month. And the next light at the end of the tunnel session is in a fortnight's time. And we have 2 Afghan Australian architects here with us to talk about the very distressing situation in Afghanistan and what we as a community might be able to do to help support them in their very big campaign to try and support their friends, family and colleagues in Afghanistan. So I think that will be a very interesting, if rather
sobering,
that's the word we're looking for, session, but please do come. I don't know, Paula's got so many things on at the moment, and we're trying to get better with our email newsletters. We sent one out today, but just keep an eye on your inbox and all your social medias, and thank you for joining us yet again. As I think all of these sessions do go online, we've got a wee bit of a backlog because we've been doing so much, but we are getting stuff, we are getting things up there, and we will also be letting you know when things are up. So have a lovely Friday.
Thank you for coming, everyone. Thank you, Ilana. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, questioners. Thank you, audience. Thank you, ball kids. Blind persons.
There's nothing like this. There's nothing like Paula's community online for being a community. And one of the reasons that I signed up to go to the hub was and to work from the hub as a flex was because of the talks and the chats in the community. There was the kind of stuff that people might get in an office, dangled in an office. This quality is from ridiculous to the consistent goodness of what you do here. It's like unparalleled. Like I couldn't name something else that's been as supportive. I just couldn't. Ilana, is there something that comes close?
Nothing. Nothing. Other than sticking on being into your ears, nothing else is as good. Is as good for the soul.
That's true. On being for inputs, but for conversation, for bringing people in, for all this kind of the tropes and the protocols that you've developed and honed, for, you know, the way the two of you
Oh, winging it.
No, well, the way the two of you have just settled into the groove of hosting, and the sort of the systems behind it, you know, there is just nothing like it.